So I want to start this review out by talking a little bit about the filmmaker behind Roma, Alfonso Cuaron. Cuaron is a Mexican filmmaker who hasn't made a film in Mexico since 2001, when he made Tu Mama Tambien. His 3 movies since then have all been major blockbuster hits, and even the worst of them are very intentional. They're very well-crafted movies. In a lot of ways, Tu Mama Tambien was kind of the precursor to all of those movies. It was a major turning point, not so much in terms of his career, but more in terms of his stylistic sensibilities, what he wanted out of movies and how he approached them. But since then, he's taken on kind of a different interpretation of his own style, putting more and more emphasis on longer and more impressive long takes, which was great at first, but by the time he got to Gravity in 2013, it was kind of starting to feel a little bit like a cheap gimmick. So when Birdman came out in 2014, I was kind of curious to see what he would do with his next movie now that his gimmick had kind of met its ultimate conclusion at the hands of a different filmmaker. What I hoped would happen, but didn't really think was going to happen, was that he would make another Mexican film. Another movie that could be kind of a guiding light for his career again. A film that could give him another look at his own style. It's taken him 5 years, but I think Roma is pretty much that. It's even more personal than I'd actually hoped for. This is a film that's just like made out of pure compassion. Roma is a film about Cuaron's own childhood memories. It's a film about a family of 5 in Roma, Mexico City. But the main character is one of their housekeepers, a woman named Cleo, who lives on the property and looks after the children almost as if they were her own. Her story is always framed in the context of whatever is going on with the family. These 2 radically different lives, separated by class, are just kind of smushed together in one home, and you feel the presence of that in almost every scene of the movie. It's not explicit, and Cleo actually never shows any bitterness about it. This movie is still made out of long takes, but it feels a little bit different from the traditional Alfonso Cuarón style of doing long takes. It doesn't feel like the director is checking his watch the whole time to see if he's broken his old record. When it's time to cut, it just cuts. And that kind of brings you back to what long takes are really great for, which is to just set you really firmly in real time, so you know there's no distortions going on with time, and it lets you just pick up all of the little details, all of the little minutiae, the liveliness of the scene, kind of on your own, at your own pace. It's worth noting as kind of a little side note that with the exception of the Harry Potter movie, Roma is pretty much the only film Alfonso Cuarón has ever done without his longtime co-filmmaker and cinematographer, Emmanuel Lubezki. You might be tempted to think that this might be part of the reason for this shift in Alfonso Cuarón's stylistic choices, but Emmanuel Lubezki was actually set to be the cinematographer for this movie. He was involved right up until 2 weeks before shooting. So it's possible that you can see a little bit of Emmanuel Lubezki in some of the ideas for shots, but the actual cinematographer on set every day was Alfonso Cuarón himself. This movie has a lot of life to take in, and a lot of that life comes in through the soundtrack. I think Cuarón really wants you to feel what it was like to live in this neighborhood in Mexico City in 1970 and 1971. Whether it be like the chattering of neighbors, or some passing street musicians, or the horrible clattering of the marching band coming by, this neighborhood really comes to life. But enough about all that stuff. As great as that stuff is, the movie's really about Cleo. She's played by a non-actor, which I love, but I can't imagine what you would have to say to a non-actor to get them to inhibit a character like this. And the best thing about this movie, the core of it all, is the compassion that the filmmaker has for this character, for Cleo. If you're wondering what I mean with all this talk about compassion, it's all kind of summed up in one scene. It's this big set-piece scene where Cleo ends up at this martial arts training day thing. And there's a whole bunch of martial artists all doing their thing. And there's one sensei guy, supposedly light years ahead of all the rest. And he's gonna do an act for them, this amazing act. And all he does is he closes his eyes and he balances on one leg. And he's like, oh, if you think it's so easy, why don't you do it? And they all try it, everyone in the audience, all of these guys who've been doing martial arts training for years. And they all try and balance with their eyes closed on one leg. And nobody can do it. Nobody in this whole big audience, except for Cleo. And she's already like 7 months pregnant. She's got a big belly already. And nobody else even notices that she can do it. It's kind of a quirky, funny little scene, but it's also kind of emotional because of what it's getting at, you know? Why would a director go to all this trouble to make this huge set piece just to show you how great this person is, how great this character is? And then the final shot of the movie just puts it all into context. And I was there with tears, So I think this might be a good time to get into the South African perspective on this, because a lot of the stuff in this movie feels really weirdly relevant to me and to South Africa. The entire relationship dynamic between Cleo and the family is something that would surprise a lot of people, how widespread it is in South Africa. To give you some idea, I was raised by a single mom who was still kind of finding her feet career-wise. So there was really not a lot of money around the house. But even so, we had enough money to afford a full-time housekeeper to be with us every single day and cook all of our meals. That should just give you some idea of how commonplace it is for middle-class families to have housekeepers in South Africa. And I think this kind of movie is a chance for us to sort of reflect on that. I don't want to see this as kind of a call out. It's more like a chance to just reflect on it, you know? To notice that it is kind of strange, even though it seems very normal to us because it's everywhere. It's kind of strange, right?
Solide et insolite.
To make things even more relevant, this movie is backgrounded by issues of land expropriation, which is just astonishing to me because that's probably like the most talked about political issue in South Africa. I'm sure the context is totally different, but it's just one of those little things that makes this movie feel even more relevant. And it's not like a passing line. They come back to this issue many times. That land expropriation was something that a lot of people were worried about at that time. The first time I watched this, I really thought this was kind of an attempt to do something in the style of Italian neo-realism, because Cuaron is always talking about bicycle thieves and how that was one of his favorite movies as a kid, one of the first movies he ever really fell in love with. That's what I thought the main goal of this movie was, and there is a lot of that in here, but there's also a lot of stuff that kind of violates that sense of realism. Not bad stuff, but just stuff that's kind of startling in a movie that feels so authentic and feels so slice of life. Like there's a shot of them rushing into the hospital, and the hospital, outside the hospital, there's this wide shot of something like 50 pregnant women all kind of walking around outside the hospital. And it's like, I don't know if that's something that was literally happening at the time, but the way it's shown in that moment is so unreal. And I think the reason for that is obviously that this isn't meant to be 100% realistic. As real as it feels, Cuaron wants to remind you that this is a memory of his. And it's a very, very old memory. And I'm guessing that's kind of what the whole airplane motif was. There's this recurring image of an airplane flying overhead. I think mostly in the really important scenes, you just see this airplane flying overhead. And the camera always gives you a chance to really notice it. And there's also this other weird thing about Pepe, one of the little kids. He's, I think, the youngest boy. He's constantly talking about when he was old, as if he's had like past lives or something. This movie's kind of distorted in the same way that memories become distorted over time. And I think the self-awareness of making your own memories so surreal actually makes this movie a lot more intimate.
Réel et surréel.
Something I feel kind of weird about bringing up is Marina de Tavira. She's the actress who plays the mother of the family. And I felt like she was on a different page to the rest of the cast. I felt like she was the only one who was acting, like old school acting, you know? Her performance is the only one that really feels like a performance. It's quite subtle, but I think this is something that can kind of be seen as a part of her character, and it does kind of fit with the warped memory reality that Roma has going for it. But it's one of the stranger things about this movie, whether it's intentional or not, and I don't know quite how I feel about it. Like, I still like the actress, and I like all of the scenes with her in it, and I like her performance. It's just very different from everything else. And it's strange. It's one of those things that I'm gonna have to come back to. So yeah, I'm pretty much totally infatuated with this movie, with the director, with all of the actors, with all of it. It's a beautiful poem to somebody who obviously meant a lot to Alfonso Cuaron in his younger years. If you haven't seen this movie already, it'll just fill you up with compassion. And that might just be the best New Year's resolution you can make. If you're South African, especially if you're a South African filmmaker, this movie is an absolute must. I can't even imagine how great South Africa's film industry would be if we were even trying to make movies like this. Our film industry would become an absolute force to be reckoned with.